So speaking of salespeople,
as we always are,
we had a long conversation previous episode about sales, and I don't know if I ever told you this, but I love a good old fashioned salesperson. As much as the previous episode I said to consultants, throw away most traditional sales advice. It's still true. I still stand by that statement. And I love a good salesperson because I'm also at one level a student of persuasion, but more so on the marketing side. And the other day, I met one of these good old fashioned, salt of the earth salespeople. And this is somebody selling HVAC systems. So my parents need to get their air conditioning and furnace replaced. And so we called up some contractors, and the gentleman visits the house, elderly, kind of went into retirement, came out of retirement. I already love him, right? And his name is George. And he pulled the most advanced positioning move I've seen in a very long time, right? And so I'm talking about this old-fashioned salesperson, but he did something very sophisticated, not becoming of an old-fashioned salesperson. This guy's been selling HVAC for 40 years, so you can build a mental image of him in your head, right? Really, really personable, very charismatic, great conversationalist, right? Going into homes every single day, talking to homeowners about HVAC systems and furnaces and ACs for 40 years. You can build a mental picture. And he pulled this ninja positioning move. You ready for it?
Ready.
In the first 2 minutes of our conversation, he flashed a badge to me. And he says, "Here's my criminal record check." What? Okay. Like, that's nice, George. I had no idea why he was showing me this. I was confused. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to react. I said, okay. And he could tell I was not following. And then he says, everybody on our team has one of these. Now, I don't like trashing my competitors, but let's just say the number one trade taught in prisons is heating and cooling. And I go, oh my goodness, what a move. Now, if you've ever bought furnace, AC, or any major like large home services purchase, what you'll realize, and I don't even realize I had this fear, but I had it, you're worried about getting ripped off, right? It's like going to the mechanic. Who knows what they're gonna, in George Costanza's famous words, Johnson rod. You need a new Johnson rod. Who knows what a Johnson rod is, right? Like, you're worried about getting ripped off because you don't know the technicalities of furnaces and ACs and installations. And if you get a bad install, then it's going to be a real headache. Or so you're worried about getting ripped off. And what George did was he stepped into that fear and he validated the fear. Whether this is true or not, I have no idea. That's not even the point. Right? But he validated the fear by essentially insinuating very directly to me that there's a lot of unsavory people in the business. And you got to be careful who you can trust. So he set the criteria. There's criminals and there's non-criminals. You don't want to hire a criminal. Not his words, but that was the implication. And then he actively positioned himself as a non-criminal. All in the first 2 minutes. Now, I've got some thoughts, but I don't want to get your reaction. I feel like you're like, I don't like this guy already.
No, I think he's great. What I want to know is George's company doing your parents' install?
No.
Oh.
But that not for this reason. Let's put it that way.
Fair.
He was the best salesperson.
Yeah.
In this case, he lost on price.
Yeah.
Right. That's a different conversation. But what's fascinating about this to me is George did not differentiate on strengths. And he had them. And that came up later. Like, our ability to install, our warranty, our products, our this, our like, there are all these strengths he could have built his positioning around. And at the end of the day, how do I compare that? Like, everyone's got strengths. I talked to 3 or 4 different contractors or installers, and they all had strengths. What's one versus the other? I'm not in a position to compare those strengths. So therefore, they become pretty meaningless after you've heard enough of them. Instead of positioning on strengths, he positioned against a fear that he knows his market has and stood on the right side of that fear.
And I would say, beyond that, he also, I think we should call it, what's genius about that is he let you know you had that fear. Right? He brought something forward. And you talk about the notion of being ripped off. There's also the notion of you're letting someone into your home, right? Into your most intimate space, and what's going to happen when they're there, and yada, yada, yada. It's your parents. You want to look after them. What he did was actually flag a fear. And my guess would be that, moving forward after he has those conversations with people, now they're asking questions, right? Now they're curious about who it is. Now they want to know, do you run criminal checks? And so I think what's really interesting is what he's also demonstrating is he knows more about this market. He knows more about you in a lot of ways than you do, because he's talking to, I don't know how many people every single day for 40 years, right? He's very clear on what people need and want. And you don't know that. This is something you do, every 20 years when your furnace starts to fail?
Yeah.
So I think the other thing that's really interesting is he also demonstrated a level of expertise, right? He demonstrated a level of knowing and a notion that he was there to look after you, right? Not just to sell to you, but to make sure you truly got what you needed, even if you didn't know what that was.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a subtle point there, right? What did you say? He let me know I had that fear. He said something to that effect, right? To that effect. He didn't install the fear. So that's subtle but important, right?
Yeah.
If I didn't, in the back of my mind, have some reservations, it wasn't about criminality. That was a new dimension, which was a really, again, brilliant play on his part. But it was about getting ripped off. I feel like I don't know a lot. I feel vulnerable as a consumer. I don't want to get ripped off. That fear existed. He didn't install that. He simply stepped into it, validated it, made it real, put some tangible criteria around it, and then met those criteria, which is worth calling out, right? Because I think a lot of our people, consultants, like to think that they're smart enough to actually instill a fear or convince their prospects that they have a problem, or convince prospects that they have a desire. And it's worth noting that we're talking about fear. The same thing can be done on the desire side. This is not to say that you have to sell to fear, you have to speak to fear. There is a time and place for that. Don't get me wrong, and you shouldn't be shy about going there. But the exact same thing can happen on the desire side. They're two sides of the same coin. So he didn't install it. He didn't create it. He tapped into a sentiment that already existed for me, and I would imagine exists for a fair chunk of his market. And this was, I'm sure, gleaned from experience in his part.
So I think the question here, everyone gets it, right? This is a pretty tangible example. How do we parlay that into what consultants do on a daily basis? So it's a little bit, because I think it's a little more subtle, right? It's not, here's my criminal check. It's something else.
It's more subtle in some ways and not so much in others. To me, the big idea here is stop selling on strengths. Stop selling on unprovable strengths. Stop selling on credentials. Stop selling on any kind of unprovable, hard to substantiate advantage, even if you believe it to be true. Because if you can't prove it to the prospect, if rather they can't prove it for themselves, it's not real. It doesn't hold water. So instead of selling on strengths, the game here is, like it is for George, it's the same for you, the consultant, is to understand, how does your prospect think about the problem that they're facing? What are they afraid of? What have they tried? What are their deep-seated fears and desires? And how are the current options in the marketplace not addressing some of those fears, not addressing some of those desires, not addressing some of those deep-seated beliefs around the problem? And how might you address them differently? Like George took a stand on criminality. That might not appeal to everybody. Some people might look at that and go, I don't care. Like that's not a concern for me, which is fine. Like take, for example, I've got a friend who runs a construction company. He's dealing with these contractors all the time. He knows how to deal with these contractors. That's not going to work on him. Right? Like he's got enough experience and savvy in the market that it's just not going to work on everybody. And your goal should not be to convert everybody, right? Your goal should not be to work with any client with a pulse in the wallet. So this is where you have to make a decision. What is the belief? What is the fear? What is the desire? What is the value that I'm going to position with or against? And how do I make that clear so that I'm establishing some real emotional resonance? Like the thing about strengths and credentials is there's no emotionality. Oh, you have a degree. Okay. Oh, you've got a team that's good at okay, but where's the emotionality? Like where can I emotionally connect with your offer, with its value proposition, with what it solves for me? It's completely devoid of that emotionality. But if we tap into fears, we tap into desires, we tap into values, that's where there's some real emotionality.
So I want to circle back to something that you said, because we talk a lot on here about what does it mean when someone's objection is price. And I feel like you sort of, you made that throwaway comment about he lost on price. And I want to talk about that because we often discuss the fact that, the price isn't the real objection. There's something else behind it. And I'm curious, when you said he lost on price, what did you mean?
Well, we ended up buying a cheaper option. We were price shoppers in this context. Now, we ended up going with somebody that was referred to me by the friend I mentioned, by the way, in construction. So there was some trust. And this person ended up coming in 20%, 25% cheaper. And also built a ton of trust in the conversation, which I won't get into because it's not the point of today's conversation. So we had a similar level of trust in both, probably more in the one that we chose, and they came in at a lower price. Now, it's worth noting for context, this is for my parents who are in their 80s, right? Spending their own money. I'm not looking to break the bank on this, right? And so in every market, there are price shoppers. And George was good. Like George said also up front, I'm not going to be the cheapest. And if you want the cheapest, it might not be us. And he's right. He wasn't the cheapest, but we were not looking for the best option. We were not, in this context, looking for the premium choice. We were looking for the cheapest choice that we could trust. There might have been even further cheaper options that we couldn't trust, right? So, the lesson there is, in every market, there are bargain hunters. There are cheaper options. I wouldn't position for them. I would position for the people that George is positioning for, because he's probably making more money than the company that we hired. So that there's a choice in every market. But do you go after the bargain hunters, or do you go after the premium buyers? And they both exist, and that's a choice.
Yeah, and what you're really talking about is, once you know who your buyers are, understanding what's critical to them, right? So George is focusing on the folks for whom, safety, trust, all of those words is most important and are willing to pay the premium. You were not focused on that. And presumably the other folks that you talked to, probably also knew that, came in, talked price, and ended up closing the deal. So, we circle back to the conversation we circle back to all the time in positioning, which is being, crystal clear on which segment of the market you're aiming for. And again, it's never everybody.
And that highlights an important point. Where do premiums come from? Because let's say, for argument's sake, they're both fundamentally selling me the same equipment. So what enables one to charge a premium versus the other? Well, George's premium stands on this idea that you can trust us because we're not criminals. And I believe, without looking at George's P&L, I believe that works for him, for the right person. And having experienced the exchange, I fundamentally believe it works. And the folks that we hired, their offer was basically, well, we're going to do the same thing for cheaper. Now, if I wanted to choose which business I wanted to own, I'd pick George's business. Better margins, probably better customers.